Hi there, welcome to the series of Vue.js, and in this section we will learn about dynamic arguments and we will also see the shorthand approach for methods and directives. So let's start. Okay, so I am back again in my Sublime text editor, and in the previous section we have discussed about directives and we have seen how we can define a directive. But how we can pass dynamic arguments to the directive. So let me show you what I mean by that. So let's say an anchor tag, and let's say we want to bind it with title attribute. Okay, so this title is basically the argument, and it always gonna bind the value of the property to this title attribute. But what if we want to bind two dynamic arguments? So let's say if we want to bind href or maybe id, so and so on. So in this case we can pass an argument which will be dynamic, and that dynamic argument must follows this third argument. So let's say here we pass argument name. Okay, and let's say here the argument value. Okay, so basically this argument name and this argument value is basically the property which will be defined within the data object. So let's define these two properties within our data object. So let's create the object first. So let's say var vm equals to new view app. Okay, now let's define these two property inside our data object. So argument name, let's say title, and this title is basically the attribute that will get bind in here, and let's provide the value for this property. So let's say I am a link. Okay, and one thing that I would like to point out here is that you can't write your property name within the data object as camel case. So if let's say you are writing something like this will not work and it will give you an error. So always avoid to write camel case properties. So let's remove and let's make it in a smaller case. Now let's try to run this in the browser and let's see what we get. Okay, so we got click here, so let's try to inspect it here. Okay, as you can see we got title and we got its value as I am a link, so it's working fine. Now let me show you how we can dynamically change this attribute. So let's go to the console section and let's clear out the console first. Now let's say if vm dot argument name is href. Okay, and let's give it a value as let's say google.com. Now if we inspect it here, as you can see it changes to href and with the value of the link. So that's how we can pass dynamic arguments. Now let's see the shorthand for directives. So generally what we do is, in order to bind an argument with a value, we write something like this. Let's say v bind href equals to something, let's say some link here. Okay, now you can shorten this code in order to bind an attribute. So for that you just need to use this colon. Okay, so this basically is similar to v bind and then href. So if we let's say do something like this and let's define this property in our app.js file. Okay, so this is a Google link, and now let's try to run this in the browser. Okay, so we got the same thing. So basically instead of writing v bind then href, you can simply write colon href. That's the shorthand for v bind. Now let's see for events. So let's say we have a button. Let's say click here. Now in the previous section we have done something like this. So here we are writing v on and then the event name, and this increment is a method which will listen to this click event. So first of all, let's define this increment method. So let's say methods increment, you just click the button. Now instead of writing v on then colon and then the event name, you can simply escape this and simply write as @click. So basically this syntax is shorthand for all the events by using v on directive. So now if we try to run this in the browser, so let's try to click it. As you can see, it's working fine. Okay, so there is a special directive that I like to discuss here, and that directive is v1s. So for, let's say we have h1 and let's print out the heading. So this v1's directive is basically will render this property heading only for once. If you change the value of this heading again, it will not gonna render again. It will just render the property heading only for once. So let's try to define it in the data object. So let's say heading, I am the heading. Now let's try to run this in the browser and let's see what we get. Okay, so we got I am heading. Now let's try to change the value of heading and let's see if it reflects the changes or not. So vm dot heading, let's say updated heading. Okay, so as you can see, we still got I am heading. So that's the use of v1s, that it will not gonna update the value of the property. Okay, so that's all for this section. In the next section we will discuss about computed properties. So till then, if you enjoy this video, please leave a like and please subscribe.